In this video, we're going to get our door to actually open and close. So we're going to use a timeline node and some custom events to create a script that opens and closes our door when an event is called. Previously, we brought this door and the door frame into the world. We made a blueprint called BP door that represents what a door is inside of the world. So I'm going to start by opening up that blueprint for what a door is. So if we remember, this blueprint is now defining to Unreal what a door is and what a door can do. Right now, we have an event begin play that fires when the door first enters the world. As a test to learn how this works, we just had it print the string hello world. I'm going to delete that because, in my opinion, a door doesn't print a piece of information to the screen just because it exists. Instead, a door opens when it's told to open, and it closes when it's told to close. So what we're going to do is we're going to create new events inside of this door that do what we need them to do, that work when we want them to run. So I'm going to create two quick events. So if I right-click here in my event graph, I'm going to be able to add nodes to my graph. One of the nodes that I can add is a custom event. So here's the option, add event. I'm going to add a custom event. We'll recognize this red box. This red box tells us that this is an event, and we get to give our event a name. Right now, the name is custom event 0, which is not meaningful. You never want to leave those kind of names. You want to make sure that if somebody looks at your code, if they look at your blueprint, they can tell exactly what your blueprint does and what it was built to do. So we're going to create two of these custom events. I'm going to create one called open door. And I'm going to create another custom event, close door. And the idea is that these events will fire when we want the door to open, and they're going to fire when we want the door to close. For now, we're just going to have these events built, and we're going to work on creating the blueprint that causes the door to open and close. But first, we're going to take a look inside of Unreal as to what that would mean to open or close a door. All right, so here we are in the Unreal editor, and I will select my door. Now that my blueprint door is selected, I can start to think about what does it mean for this door to open? To us as humans, we have a basic idea from our day-to-day experience of what opening a door would mean, but Unreal doesn't have any idea what that means. We're going to need to find a way to describe to Unreal what it means to open up this door. So if we take a look at the details tab for our door here, I have my door selected, and down here are the details of my door. One of the sections that I have is the transform. And if we remember, the transform section holds the location, the rotation, and the scale of our door. So if I were to think about it and I were to ask, what does a door do when it opens? Well, it kind of rotates on its hinges. So if I were to take my Z coordinate, which it says Z or yaw, right? Yaw is when you're going to kind of rotate around your up and down, around your top and bottom. If I were to take that and I were to change this number, so I'm going to click and drag side to side, we'll see that by changing that number, it starts to rotate my door, right? And if I want my door to open, right, I'm going to want to change the rotation of my door. But I don't want my door's rotation to just immediately flip. I want it to slowly change over time. I want it to start here at 0 when it's closed, and then slowly increase that rotation until it reaches the angle that I want to have count as my door being opened. So let's build a script that's able to do this whenever we tell the door to run the open door event. So if I open up my blueprint door, we're going to have something occur when the door is open. We're going to have the door rotate on its Z-axis from a start position to an end position. Now, if we remember, we wanted our script to be reusable. So we may have a situation where our door has a different open angle. So in some places, I can open my door only 90 degrees. Some places it'll only open a smaller amount. Some places it'll open a larger amount. So I'm going to create variables to hold how far my door can rotate open. So this is my door open rotation. And if we remember the type of variable, it's going to need a decimal point. So numbers with a decimal point are going to be float values. I'm going to add another door close rotation. It's also a float variable. I need both of those to be exposed so that we can see them inside of the details panel. Now we're going to set up an event that says, as time passes, as time goes on, the door is going to change its rotation, starting at the open rotation and ending at the close rotation. To do that, we're going to need a special node called a timeline node. So I'm going to drag out from my open door event, and I'm going to create a node called timeline. Down here at the bottom, I have this option, add timeline, and there we go. So here's our timeline. What's going to happen is that when I call the open door event, it's going to tell my timeline to play. So that means my timeline is going to start moving forward. So if I double click on this timeline, we can take a look at how the timeline is going to work. So here's my timeline 0. My timeline 0 is going to have this track that says this is the information that's going to change over time. So I'm going to click to add a track, and we're going to add a float track. This track is going to need a name, so I'm going to give this a name of rotation percentage. If we take a look at our timeline here, here's the length. This is how long it's going to last. Right now, this says it's going to take 5 seconds to open the door. I'm going to shorten that to just a 1.5 second opening of the door. So now my door only takes 1.5 seconds to open. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my mouse wheel to kind of zoom out until my timeline can go from 0 to 1. So I'm going to get to the end here, and I'm going to right click at my time, and I'm going to add a key. For this key, I want it to be at the end value, so I'm actually going to type in the number 1.5. Some people will try to drag it to exactly the right position. I'm not that skilled with the mouse, so I'm going to just type the number in and set it to 1.5. And I'm going to say that at 1.5, I want to be at the value 1. I'm going to add another key. This key is going to be at 0, and the value is going to be 0. So now I have 2 keys inside of my timeline. One at 0 at the very beginning, which means at time 0, it's going to have a value of 0 that comes out of this rotation percentage value. Then as time goes on, as this plays, right, it's going to change that value and it's going to get larger until at 1.5 seconds, it's going to be a value of 1. And now I'm going to be using this as what percentage of the rotation I want my door rotated open. So at 0, I want my door rotated 0% open. At 1.5 seconds, I want it to be rotated 100% open. And that's what this timeline is going to do. So we're going to do a lot of timelines where we're going to build them with percentages in mind. So we're going to get used to this idea that at the start of the timeline, we might be at 0. And at the end of our timeline, we'll be at 1 for 100%, 0 for 0%. And then the decimal values in between will represent what percentage that value is at. Excellent. So with that in mind, I'm going to save, compile, and we're going to go back from our timeline, right, to our event graph. And now we're going to see, right, here's the rotation percentage, which is a float that's coming out of that timeline. So it'll give us a value between 0 and 1. Every update, every frame draw that this timeline is running, right, I'm going to change the rotation of my door. So I'm going to set actor rotation. The set actor rotation node is going to take any object that we send in. This blue node says it's going to be an actor that's coming in. An actor is any object inside of our world. And it's going to change its rotation to match this new rotation that's here. So if I look, right, my target, the actor that we're rotating, is myself. So since I'm inside of the door blueprint, this describes any door that might be in my game. And I'm going to say this current door, the door that's running right now, is what's going to rotate. Now it wants to bring in this purple variable, which is a rotator, which can allow us to set the X, Y, and Z rotations, but we only want to change the Z rotation. So what we're going to do is we're going to split this from one pin that represents all three of these values to three separate pins, one for each of these values. To do that, I'm going to right click on the pin and I'm going to say split structure pin or split struct pin. When I do that, we'll see that there are now three floating values, one for each of these. And what I want to rotate is I want to rotate my Z. So I'm going to be changing just the Z value. However, what value am I rotating it to? Well, I want to change it to a percentage between two different values. So when I'm at 0%, I want to be at my door close rotation. When I'm at 100%, I want to be at my door open rotation. And as I change between the two, I want to be whatever percentage I am between those two rotations. So in order to find the percentage between two values, we're going to do what is known as a linear interpolation, otherwise known as a lerp. So this new value that comes out of this rotation X, I'm going to set that value. So we're coming off of that pin, right? And we're going to do a linear interpolation, otherwise known as a lerp. So I'm going to take this lerp node. Now what this lerp node does is it allows us to pass in two values, value A, value B, and then this will give us a percentage in between the two. So I'm going to take my door open rotation, and that's going to be my target B. I'm going to take my door close rotation, and that's going to be my target A. But what percentage between the two it is based on what comes into alpha. So if my alpha is 0, it's going to be entirely A. It's going to be closed. If my alpha is 1, it's going to be 100% and it's going to be open. But if you remember, we created a timeline that over time starts at 0, and then every frame it changes so that it becomes closer and closer to 1. That's our rotation percentage that comes out of our timeline. So I'm going to connect that to my alpha. So now, and let me make my blueprint a little prettier to look at. Now the way that my blueprint works is that when they call the open door event, it's going to play a timeline. This timeline is going to change this number that comes out of here so that at the beginning it starts at 0. Then it gets closer and closer to 1, and it reaches 1 at that 1.5 seconds that we told it to reach 1 at. So over time, this value is going to change from 0 to 1, and as it changes, it's going to pass that information into set actor rotation, and we're going to rotate the z-axis of our self, because we're the door, it's our self, from 100% closed to 100% open, or from 0, which is closed, to 1, which is open. And so this is going to allow us that when we call the open door event, it will open the door. Now that we have this built, we're going to want to give it a test, right? So I'm going to test this out by saving and compiling. And then we need to call the open door event. So to call the open door event, I'm just going to make sure that we call it when we begin playing. So on my begin play, as a test, I'm going to call open door. And so you'll notice that as we created custom events, when we create our own events, they're going to appear as actions that we can do. So here's my closed door, right? Here's my open door. So the events that we create are going to be actions that we can do. All right, so I'm going to save, compile, and give this a test. What it's going to do is on begin play, it's going to call the open door event. The open door event is a custom event that says, start running this timeline. The timeline starts with rotation percentage at 0 and ends with it at 1. We know this because if I open up that timeline, I've drawn my keyframes to say that at 0, right, I want to be at this point, And at 1.5 seconds, I want to be at this point. And my timeline will play across and move up this line to reach that point. All right, so I'm going to save, compile, and go back to Unreal. And we can give this a test. Before we can test it, we need to make sure that all of our data is set. So I'm going to change the rotation on my door back to 0 so that it stays in the closed position when we start. I'm going to set the value under default so that my door open rotation is 120 degrees, which was the nice value for open that I saw when I tested to see how far I could open my door. And then the last thing that I need to do is I need to set the mobility. Right now, my object is set to static, which means it can't be moved around in-game or while the game is playing. I'm going to change it to being movable. So I'm going to click on movable, and now my door object can actually move as we play the game. So with those settings made, my default values of my open and close rotation set to values that I tested and found would be nice. And my mobility set to movable, I'm going to be able to press play and we'll be able to see our timeline in action. There we go. My door just opened. And so now I'll be able to run on through it. Now that we've gotten our doors to be able to open when we call the open door event, we can look at creating a closed door event that's going to allow our doors to close. So if I go back to my blueprint door, I'm going to go back to my event graph. And now, instead of just with the open door, right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove my tick and overlap because I don't need them. But I'm going to edit my closed door. All right, so now that I have my open door event, I'm going to call a closed door event as well. Now, closing the door is actually just going to do the opposite of what opening my door did. So instead of playing my timeline forward, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but we're going to play it in reverse. We're going to play the timeline in the other direction. So I'm going to grab this closed door event, and it's just going to call the reverse node on the timeline. And what that's going to do is it's going to change this timeline so that now it runs backwards from the end where the value is at 1 to the start where the value is at 0. And so now we have two different nodes, one for opening the door and one for closing it. We're not going to be able to test our closed door until we get further along in our coding, and we're actually able to change from open to close while the door is kind of opening or closing. Right now, our timeline is starting at the beginning where it's assuming that the door is closed. So even if we were to reverse it, it would still be in the closed position. So we're not able to do anything with that timeline at the moment. In our next video, we're going to add one more piece of functionality that's really going to be valuable for helping us create a lot of the interesting events that occur inside of the games that we play.